Tilea's Troubles, Part 7. Chivalry. Spring, 2401, Terme Castle, Northern Tilea. The Castellan of Terme, Sir Fromony dal Guinac, had arrayed his limited force as best he could. All he possessed to defend his home were longbowmen and men-at-arms, merely peasants bolstered with a handful of yeomen, and not sufficiently numerous even to man every wall and tower. It had taken some careful thought as to where to place each of his 3 companies, so that they could move quickly to wherever they might be needed in the fight. His men-at-arms, which he personally commanded, guarded the gate, while his archers flanked him, one company on a wall to the left, the other on the tower to the right. Although they were twice as tall as any man, Sir Fromony was sure the brute foe would be unable to scale the towers, so the archers to his right were instructed to move to the defence of the empty wall beside them if the foe showed any likelihood of approaching it. This disposition still left stretches of undefended walls, but the enemy was surely not so numerous as to be able to attack all at once, and all he and his men had to do was buy time, for he had sent a request for relief. He felt assured that his master, Lord Giacomo Uberti, would not abandon Terme Castle to its fate. His confidence was not misplaced, for 2 large bodies of mounted knights were indeed thundering by way of the shortest route possible from Rivola towards Terme. Knights of the realm galloped at the fore, commanded by the paladin Sir Gregoire de Vienne, bedecked in a surcoat and barding of red-bordered blue, bearing a white griffin rampant upon his shield and a drake's head crest on his helm. By his side rode Sir Galwin, the ensign, carrying Rivola's standard, per pale, gules, and or a bull's head sable, upon a striped argent and sable silk flag. Behind them rode the knights errant, younger in years and a little less ornamented. They could have ridden at the fore, and easily outstripped the older knights in pace, but it was not their place to ride at the head of the little column. The 2 companies made 18 riders in total, which was not all the soldiers Duke Giacomo had at his disposal, but he had been loath to send more, for he suspected the attack on Terme could well be a deliberate distraction, a ruse intended to draw off his strength so that another attack might be launched against Rivola itself. Such strategies had been employed by the Campergrotten brutes in the past. As his own red and yellow standard was placed upon the battlement beside him, Sir Fromony peered over the crenulated parapet at the foe mustering upon the rocky ground before the walls. He wore his heavy armour of polished steel, and atop his helm sprouted a red fleur-de-lis crest, a twist of yellow braiding decorating its base. He could see that 2 large companies of grey-fleshed brutes made up the main strength, their grisly banners of bones, skins, and looted shields of old foes held at their fore. Upon one flank a shaggy hided beast dragged some sort of trebuchet, whilst on the other flank a company of brutes carried cannon barrels. No carriages, no trucks, just the barrels. He had heard stories of such, but had presumed them to be exaggerations. Apparently not so. These brutes were indeed strong enough to discharge cannons as if they were handguns. The larger companies were hauling ladders, suggesting that they intended to climb the walls rather than battering at them with shot to fell them. That made sense, for the guns they had, no matter how impressively handled, could hardly be considered siege pieces. At the very moment their companies were finally sorted into ranks and files, a bellowing cry signalled the advance, and the ogres came on hastily. If the relief did not come now, thought Sir Fromony, Terme was surely doomed. The almost entirely peasant garrison could not hope to stand against such fearsome assailants, even protected by sturdy stone walls. His fearful reverie concerning his doom was broken, when he heard shouted commands to loose from both his left and right, upon which volleys of arrows arced impressively from the walls. It was a sight which momentarily gave him hope. Surely such a storm of sharpened steel would sting any foe. But to his horror, as the arrows hit home, not a single ogre fell. Umpteen shafts could be seen, hanging from their chests, arms and shoulders, waggling about as the ogres marched on. Yet not one of the grey-skinned brutes had seemed remotely perturbed. The large contraption pulled by the hairy beast proved indeed to be a species of trebuchet, for suddenly a timber and iron arm swung up to hurl its own ragged cloud of missiles in the opposite direction. Sir Fromony wondered to himself why they were not throwing large rocks, and watched with mild confusion as the remarkably well-placed shot resulted in a mere clattering against the castle gate. Then came the joyful answer to Sir Fromony's prayers, the sweet sound of horn blasts, followed quickly by the thunderous beat of heavy hooves. A relief force had indeed arrived, and not a moment too soon. 2 bodies of colourfully bedecked knights came hurtling through the morning mist like heroes from some legendary tale of knightly courage and uncannily fortunate timing. Just as they arrived, a single carrying ogre did succumb to the second volley of arrows from the walls. These 2 events meant the men of the garrison had every reason to cheer, and cheer they did. Their joy, however, was quickly cut short, as the ogres, showing remarkable alacrity for such hulking creatures, charged the walls. It seemed clear to Sir Fromony that the enemy knew full well the danger they were in, what with lance-armed knights to their rear, and that with this in mind they intended to gain the sanctuary of the walls before the knights could reach them to deliver their thrusts. Yet for Sir Fromony, even the notion that the foe might be acting out of fear failed entirely to reassure him. All it had achieved was to double their pace. One company reached the walls with terrifying speed, laid their ladders promptly, and began their climb, while cannon-wielding ogres spun around to point their cruel muzzles at the knights-errant among the advancing chivalry. The ogre's magic-using slaughtermaster now summoned up a bone-crushing spell to kill 2 of the knights-errant, then conjured further magic to enfold himself and the brutes by his side in a magical protection. The hand-held cannons gave vent to a thunderous blast and felled another knight, whilst a second load of scrap hurtled down to clatter off the young knight's armour. None of this perceptibly slowed the knights' advance. Yet they were still in danger of closing in too late, for up at the wall the ogres were climbing both quickly and surely, the first to reach the top, ripping a yeoman warder up and over the parapet to send him tumbling horribly to his death. The sight and sound of this, along with the only fractionally less gruesome death of several more archers, sapped all courage from the defenders, who leapt down to flee into the courtyard. This allowed the ogres to clamber almost leisurely over the crenellations and onto the rampart. While several ogres jeered and laughed at the running archers, the rest calmly turned to see if the knights had caught up with their comrades, as if taking the wall had been nothing more than a stroll up the hill. The gentleman of the relief force could see that the foe's trebuchet-hauling beast was threatening to charge, bucking and rearing as it turned and picked up pace. Unwilling to be so distracted, the knights of the realm charged across the front of the knights-errant and slammed into the cannon-wielding ogres, intending to burst through, then gallop along the base of the walls to reach the second company of brutes, before they too surmounted a wall. In this they had some success, one of them driving his lance right through an ogre in the first impact, after which the knights rode down the rest of the brutes as they fled, felling the slaughtermaster himself, who was carried along by the others. Apparently, the magical protection he had conjured was not powerful enough. In a somewhat ungainly fashion, the knights spurred their mounts over the large, lumpen corpses and towards the wall. The enemy was there, up ahead, but could they be reached in time? Perhaps distracted by the knight's dash, the scrap-launching beast now shuffled unsurely towards the knights-errant. But the foot-slogging ogres were wasting no time themselves. Hurtling at, then up, the walls, they hacked down several foes and sent the rest, Sir Fromony included, fleeing into the courtyard, just as had happened at the other wall. Outside, the chivalry was dismayed. It was clear now that their arrival, by mere moments, was too late. The ogres were already in the castle, and the screams emanating from within, as well as the peasants tumbling from the walls to thud horribly onto the rocky ground below, made it very clear that the fight was lost. The knights had no means to scale the walls, the ogres laughing raucously as they drew up all their ladders to leave none outside. The gate was locked and barred, and showed no signs of opening. Frustrated, the knights errant threw themselves at the only foe they could, chasing the ogre's chariot-cum-stone-thrower across the field to watch it smash itself to pieces trying to cross a hedge. Inside the castle, 2 bruisers leapt from the wall, leaving the other ogres in possession, and charged across the courtyard to make mincemeat of the momentarily rallied archers. The castle was all but taken, and all that remained was the butchering of the last of the garrison, an activity the ogres took grisly pleasure in. What became of Sophromonie, nobody knows, but most would agree it is not hard to guess. Meanwhile, the ogre's commander, the fearsome tyrant Rasgar Boulderguts, was not happy. He'd worked himself up for a fight, which he did not feel he had yet done. Outside, the knights were galloping up and down, obviously unsure as to what they should do next. "Come out!" cried one of them. "Come out and fight!" Others now joined in, adding mockery to the suggestion. "You came here to hide, did you?" one shouted. "See how ogres run!" jeered another. Then the paladin, Sir Gregoire de Vienne, ordered silence. This gained, he shouted, "I challenge any one of you to single combat. Come out if you dare. If you possess any semblance of honour, come out and face me, 1-on-1. Boulderguts, not an ogre ever to suffer doubt, laughed. His god had answered his prayer. Here was the chance to sate his urge to fight. He ordered the gate opened and strode out boldly, hefting a rusty and blooded blade bigger than a man in one hand, and an iron-bound war mallet heavier than a man in the other. "You!" he bawled. "You want to fight? Then fight!" With a roar, he launched into a run, while the paladin spurred his destrier to charge. When they met, there was a mighty crunch, as Bouldergut's gut-plate horns thrust through mail to pierce deep into horseflesh. The ogre tyrant's armour glittered magically as the knight's frantic blows glanced off it. Then, after pausing for a moment as if to consider which weapon to favour, Bouldergut swung with his huge blade and sliced right through both the horse's head and the paladin sat behind it. As the ogre tyrant let loose a victorious, bellowing roar, the knights, knowing that single combat had been offered and accepted, decided to combine honour and common sense and ride back to Rivola. They had some bad news to deliver.